Hi, everyone. Whoa. Didn't expect to find so many of you here, but I will do a few shout outs. In any case, thank you, and thank you for sharing, by the way. And hello, Dolores and Lana, Kay, Glenna Mayer. Hi, Gina Marie. Hi. And Matarato. Very nice to see you tonight. Hi, Stephanie. How you doing? Joe, smile. Okay, I'll smile. Okay, Glenna comments, says, I got no sleep, up watching the unicorn riot all night. I may fall asleep, sorry. I was going to say you're on camera, candid camera. I'm dating myself now. I remember that too. John Sienna says, hello, comrades. And Dolores says, sharing. Lana says, please, everyone, share to your page. Stephanie says, sharing. Lana says, me too, Glenna. Sandy Degg says, hello. Hi, Sandy. Hi, Jeff. Hi, Stacy. Hi, Rick. Okay. So another person, specifically another black person, by the name of George Floyd, was killed. And he was killed by a cop who placed a knee on his neck and his full weight on the man's neck for, was it 5 minutes? Was it 6 minutes? Was it 7 minutes? Was it actually 9 minutes? Um, I'm not sure exactly what the time was. The mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Fry, said it was for 5 minutes. Some of the articles that came out today are saying that it was as long as 9 minutes. However long it was long enough, as far as we know, to have caused George Floyd's death. Okay, so it was a killing. So technically, there's going to be an investigation, and there's going to be a finding as to whether it was legally a murder or not, somewhere down the line. And the context of it is, of course, is that we have a continual stream of deaths and deaths, of black people, and mostly black males, but there have been black women too who have been killed for no reason. Sometimes people are tried, sometimes they are never tried. But generally speaking, no one pays the price. And there is apparently no deterrence. And there is apparently no nationwide effort to do anything about this. There is grief, and there is outrage, and there are bold statements. And there are statements of how tired people are of this. We can't be tired of this. We have to stop it. And if we're going to stop it, we cannot be tired. We have a political situation that is not favorable to stopping this, at least a national political situation. That is not favorable to stopping this. Because we have someone in the presidency who encourages this, who has said words to the effect that the police are too gentle on people, that maybe they have to be tougher. Of course, the same man is famous for advocating for the death of the Central Park Five, 5 black males, who later were found to be innocent at a later time, as shown by DNA testing. And the person who is now the President of the United States, hi Charles, and good evening to you. The President who is now the United States, even then, was speaking in what apparently was denial of the DNA testing and what it showed, still in favor of simply throwing away the key when it came to these men. So this is a man who encourages violence, who continues the regime of killing black people just because they're black. I don't know how to escalate this to the number one priority in our country. I wish I could do this. I wish I could do this. But there are a lot of things that must be done to change the priority and to make it the number one priority in our country, at least in a tie with other priorities, for number one. Because there are many things that are necessary for this country. To remove this problem of killing people due to their color, is a number one priority for this country. But another number one priority is Medicare for all. And another number one priority is a Green New Deal. And another number one priority is getting money out of politics. And all of these priorities and the other very important ones we have are all dependent on changing our political regime, specifically developing our Congress, ensuring that the president that we elect are together in pushing to solve all of these number one priorities, but especially focused on this number one priority of making all our citizens have the right to life, at least have the right to life. The first right. We have to make this happen. We have to make this happen. It won't happen if the Republican Party remains in power. We know that. It's so obvious. It's so obvious. That they are a primary part of this problem. It won't happen. It won't happen if the president, who self-evidently practices racial prejudice everywhere he goes and fosters hatred. It won't happen if that president stays in power any longer. He must be defeated. So the Congress must be a focus. The president must be a focus. But at the state level, the state governors must be a focus too. And the mayors must be a focus as well. And the police chiefs must be a focus as well. And the police departments and the police unions must be a focus as well. There must be a united effort to get people mobilized to run this pandemic of killing Black people out of this country for good. So Lana says maybe the police should be required to take the physician's oath first, but do no harm. They might be required to take that oath, but that doesn't mean they're going to act in that way. Stacy says there needs to be a publicly searchable nationwide database that lists cops, where they have worked, the things they have done, complaints, firings, prosecutions, and all the legal players involved as well. Also, VICAP. Please tell us what the VICAP is, Stacy. Must must be mandatory. I guess that's the cameras on patrol cars, I suspect. Matt says this is a problem with the duopoly. For decades, these problems have been talked about, but nothing gets done. Do we realize, for example, that almost 50% of young black children live in poverty? It's hideously immoral. Yes, it is. Absolutely. This is a problem we have to work on at all the levels of government, and obviously at the level of culture too. But changing cultures in a short period of time is extremely difficult. I am of the opinion that you do much to change cultures when you change the laws and when you enforce the laws. Don McCaslin correctly points out police forces are sent to Israel for training in merciless crowd control. That is true. And the Israelis, of course, are immoral in their techniques of crowd control because they're practicing them continuously on the Arab population, to which they will not give any rights. It's as if our police were being trained by Southern police forces but during the time of the segregation, but even worse over in Israel. Even worse these days, okay, in Israel. Anyway, to go on, there is not one solution to this. There are many solutions. To begin to solve things, though, in Minnesota, there needs to be an overhaul of the civil rights laws. They need to be much more specific and much more explicit when it comes to controlling the police. Okay. Every time there's a death, it can't be handled at the department level. There has to be an investigation coming down from the state level. In certain cases, perhaps coming down from the federal level. Okay. But I think right now the problem is getting the investigations out of the departments. Getting the investigations away from the unions. The police unions obviously have no interest in enforcing the law. Their main interest is in protecting the police. Whatever an individual policeman has done wrong, they're going to protect their own. All over the country, they've made that quite clear. They don't care about anything else. They don't care about civil rights. They don't care about civil liberties. Oh, they don't care about freedom of assembly. They just don't care. Update, says Rick Maynard, it's been revealed that Officer Jacob Pedersen of the St. Paul Police Department was the culprit responsible for kickstarting the riot in South Minneapolis. He was captured on camera and identified by his ex-wife. Thank you, ex-wife. Was he identified but from the video of somebody in a mask breaking the rash of windows at the Target store? Was he the one who was doing that? Officer Pedersen of the St. Paul Police Department. Kay says that union is a bad one. Yeah, the police unions all over the country are unions that function only to protect their own. They care nothing about anything else. They have to be subject to the law too. They have to be made subject to the law. We need police unions. I'm not against police unions. People who work for the government have the right to have unions too. But when those unions turn against the law, the unions themselves have to be investigated and prosecuted. That has to happen. The relations between the prosecutors and the police have to be investigated in most of our cities, because they work together. There is an incentive for the prosecutors not to screw with the police and vice versa. And they collude continuously to cover for one another. Rick said, I watched the video, looked like a pizza delivery kept following and filming him. It looked like someone with a phone to me was following, and filming him. Barbara says the protests, awesome. Parts of the protests there that I saw were but peaceful, but certainly there was violence. There was destruction at the Target store. Well, what do you expect? There's a tremendous amount of pain and hostility, and rightfully so. When people have it up to here, at some point, they're going to hit back. They may blindly hit back. What they do may not be very rational, but it is understandable. It is done out of pain and out of hate. And when other people kill you, and when they oppress you, and they ruin your lives in various ways, there is likely to be hate. There is likely to be anger. It is only human. And Charles Lovett says, and Jim Crow Joe Biden is just as bad as Trump. All Minneapolis had to do is arrest those murdering cops, and the rioting would not have escalated. Probably won't stop until they're booked. Dr. Joe, you were on point, though, addressing income inequality with progressive policies. Oh, those are absolutely important, Charles. We know that's part of the background and part of the context, of all this. But also, while that's been part of the context and part of the background for all of it, as far back in history as we can go, the discrimination and the racism, and the prejudice has been part of the context of this, part of the culture, as far back as we can go. Really coming from all the states. But of course, the worst system set up to perpetuate the racism and the hierarchy of the racial structure has come from the southern states. It has come from there. But there, of course, is hatred and racism and oppression all through the northern states, too. The state of Minnesota is probably one of the more progressive states when it comes to racism. But still, Minnesota has the poison in its midst. The poison in its midst. Sorry. I said mist when I meant in its midst. I can't say too much of this. I'm going to go over the news. I will say more about it, of course, as I go along. But I'm going to share some articles for a while. So, there was one in The Guardian on May 26th covering hundreds demand justice in Minneapolis after police killing of George Floyd. Okay, this one is dated May the 26th. You notice, I've got to share this for you. Okay, you notice a very nice photo there. Stop killing black people. That's the story. Police and protesters clashed in Minneapolis on Tuesday evening following a demonstration at the intersection where George Floyd was killed in an altercation with police officers the day before. Hundreds of protesters gathered in the city to demand justice after Floyd, who was African American, was killed when a white Minneapolis police officer knelt on his neck as he lay on the ground during an arrest. Footage of the incident showed Floyd shouting, "I cannot breathe," quote unquote, and quote, "don't kill me," unquote. A large and diverse crowd had gathered at the start of the protest with some carrying signs reading, quote, "I can't breathe," unquote, and quote, "jail killer KK cops," and unquote, and chanting, quote, "prosecute the police." And of course, the Twin Cities have seen several consecutive years of protest against the police killings of black men, and in one case, an unarmed white Australian woman. But the gathering Tuesday was one of the largest the metro area has ever seen. Could have been my son, it could have been me, it shouldn't be, said a protester carrying a sign saying, "Lock them up." Here's a picture of police throwing tear gas bombs, heavily armed, heavily defensive. At the precinct, as the rain came down heavily, windows were damaged, and squad cars sprayed with graffiti. Protesters threw water and milk bottles at the offices, shouting "pigs" and "how could you." Police fired green tear gas and stun grenades to disperse the crowd approaching the station. Dozens of protesters gathered in a Target parking lot. Floyd died late on Sunday when officers responded to a call from a grocery store that claimed Floyd had used a forged check. Police said Floyd physically resisted officers while possibly under the influence of drugs or alcohol. In the video footage, witnesses can be heard shouting at officers to get off Floyd's neck. One yells, quote, "Bro, he's not even fucking moving," unquote. Another asks if, quote, "you're going to just sit there with your knee on his neck." On Tuesday, the Minneapolis police confirmed Floyd died a short time after the medical incident after being transported to a hospital. Quote, "They're able to get the suspect into handcuffs and realize the suspect was suffering a medical distress," the spokesman said, saying officers, quote, "called for an ambulance," unquote. The Minneapolis mayor, Jacob Fry, apologized to Floyd's family on Tuesday morning, saying Floyd should not have died, quote unquote. And he said, for 5 minutes, we watched as a white officer pressed his knee to the neck of a black man. Fry said, quote again, for 5 minutes, this officer failed in the most basic human sense. I saw Fry's statement. He was obviously very, very disturbed and very, very angry. The 4 police who were on the scene at the time were immediately fired, and we'll get to the firings. But also the mayor notably said he doesn't know how the people who did the killing are not in jail. Having watched it, he doesn't know how or why they are not in jail. He doesn't know how they've escaped charging, okay, immediate charging. He says he wants to be careful, he wants to be fair, but after seeing the video, how can there be anything but a charge leveled? FBI investigates the death of a black man after footage shows officer kneeling on his neck. This one was by Kenya Evelyn in Washington, done on the 26th of May. And it's the Guardian again. The FBI and authorities of Minnesota have launched investigations into the death of an African-American man after an incident captured on video. In the footage, the man was later identified as George Floyd, 46, can be heard to shout, don't kill me. And you can see this article is very much the same as the earlier one that I went over. In fact, maybe the same article with different photos. Speakers of the demonstration welcomed news that 4 police officers involved in the incident had been fired. The FBI is investigating the incident for possible civil rights violations. And Jacob Fry is quoted here in the same way as in the earlier article. And Fry added, but Floyd should not have died, as he apologized to the family and the black community, okay, in Minneapolis. When located in his car, police said that Floyd physically resisted officers while possibly under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Well, an autopsy will probably determine that. In a press conference on Tuesday, the Minneapolis Police Department confirmed he died a short time after a medical incident after being transported to a hospital. Doesn't look like a medical incident to me. It looked like a police incident. It looked like the police were brutalizing him. And Fry tweeted, 4 responding MPD officers involved in the death of George Floyd have been terminated. This is the right call. And the witness, Darnella Fraser, said they was pinning him down by his neck and he was crying. They wasn't trying to take him serious. The police killed him, bro, right in front of everybody, unquote. Floyd's family retained the prominent civil rights attorney, Benjamin Crump, who in a statement said Floyd's death was the result of, quote, was the result of abusive, excessive, and inhumane use of force. We will seek justice for the family of George Floyd as we demand answers from the Minnesota Police Department. The quote unquote, Crum said, how many wild black deaths will it take until the racial profiling and undervaluing of black lives by police finally ends? I don't know how many deaths it's going to take, but I do know it's only going to end when the laws change and when the laws are enforced. Law enforcement officials in Minnesota have come under fire in recent years. Protests erupted in 2016 after 32-year-old Philando Castile, who was black, was shot and killed by a St. Anthony police officer during a traffic stop. Footage of the incident also went viral online. The officer, Geronimo Yanez, who is a Latino, was acquitted of a second-degree manslaughter charge and 2 counts of dangerous discharge of a firearm. That, I followed that at the time. That was a terrible, terrible travesty. A travesty. And Philando Castile, by all accounts, was a prince of a person. On Tuesday, the Minneapolis City Council member, Andre Jenkins, said in a statement that the community, quote, must demand answers, unquote, as it, quote, continues to be traumatized again and again. And the Democratic Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar demanded, quote, a complete and thorough outside investigation, saying in a statement, quote again, those involved in the incident must be held accountable, unquote. Klobuchar, a former 2020 presidential candidate, has faced criticism for not prosecuting controversial police killings of black people when she was a county district attorney. In fact, it turns out that the person most responsible for this killing, Officer Chauvin, was but someone who was involved in an earlier killing and who Amy Klobuchar declined to prosecute at the time. I think that appears in another one of the articles that I'm going to go over. Sorry, I should have shared that one with you, but I did not do that. So let us move on to the next one. I promise I will share it. So much has happened. So much has happened since the killing. George Floyd's sister says officers should face a murder charge as protests grow. I couldn't agree with him anymore. Okay, and there's a little video. The graphic footage shows the lead up, to the death of George Floyd. Sister of George Floyd, the black man killed by the police, in Minneapolis after an incident captured on video. Has called for those involved in his death to be charged with murder. Bridget Floyd said that 4 of the officers involved who were fired on Tuesday should be in jail for murder. George Floyd died on Monday The FBI and authorities in Minnesota have launched investigations into his death. The officer who dealt on Floyd's neck is white, has been identified as Derek Chauvin, a 19-year veteran of the force. The killing prompted huge protests in Minneapolis on Tuesday night. Police in riot gear fired tear gas and rubber bullets into the crowd. So here's an officer who's a 19-year veteran of the force, who's been involved in killings and in brutality before, if I'm not mistaken, on 3 or 4 previous occasions, and yet he was still on the force. The killing prompted huge protests in Minneapolis on Tuesday night, as we've seen. Police in riot gear fired tear gas and rubber bullets into the crowd, and there's some video of that too, which I'm not going to play. On Wednesday, protesters continued to gather at the site of the altercation, where demonstrations remained peaceful throughout the evening. Several blocks away, crowds surrounded a police precinct, as some smashed in windows and vandalized the building. Police responded with more tear gas, and rubber bullets, and also grenades. Flash grenades. At least one person was struck by a deterrent round in the head, causing severe injuries and a trip to the hospital. Tweeted freelance journalist Jared Goyette. Reports emerged of looting of local shops, at least one of which caught fire. And a tweet that AutoZone on Lake Street has caught fire. It was looted earlier in the evening. I was under the impression that it was the Target that caught fire, but maybe both did. Smaller demonstrations took place outside the home of Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman. There were calls for him to charge the officers with murder. Others gathered at the home of Chauvin. Earlier on Wednesday, rights lawyer Ben Crump, who's representing Floyd's family, issued a statement urging protesters to stay peaceful and socially distant. We cannot sink to the level, of our oppressors, and we must not endanger others during this the pandemic. In Los Angeles, the police chief, whose name is I guess it's Michelle Moore, or maybe Michael Moore, I don't know how he pronounces it, issued a statement calling the arrest video disturbing. On Wednesday evening, protesters blocked both sides of the 101 freeway. Local TV footage showed one person who appeared to be receiving medical attention, and at least one patrol car whose windows were smashed. And that's the scene in downtown LA, with people trying to protest and to be at least somewhat socially distant, as well. On Wednesday morning, Bridget Floyd struggled to hold back tears as she spoke to NBC's Today Show about the family's shock and grief. She said, "Me and my family are taking this very, very hard. It's very heartbreaking. It's very disturbing. I would like for these officers to be charged with murder, because that's exactly what they did. They murdered my brother. He was crying for help." Jacob Fry, the mayor of Minneapolis, also called for criminal charges to be filed against Chauvin on Wednesday. I want to emphasize how rare it is for a mayor in a situation like this to call for criminal charges immediately against the officer involved. And Fry said, "I've wrestled with more than anything else over the last 36 hours. One fundamental question: why is the man who killed George Floyd not in jail?" Unquote. said Fry, who was white. He later added, quote, I saw no threat. I saw nothing that would signal that this kind of force was necessary. I didn't see anything to signal that either. I saw a man who was handcuffed, who was in restraints behind his back. What could he do to resist so forcefully that it was necessary to pin him by his neck to the street? What could he do? Donald Trump called Floyd's death very sad and tragic in a tweet on Wednesday evening. At my request, the FBI and Department of Justice are already well into an investigation as to the very sad and tragic death in Minnesota of George Floyd, he tweeted. I've asked for this investigation to be expedited and greatly appreciate all of the work done by local law enforcement, unquote. Well, it turns out there that the FBI had already started the investigation. And their starting the investigation was not at the request of Donald Trump. It was before his request was actually received. So Trump, as usual, is stretching the truth just a wee bit. In the footage that emerged of Floyd's violent detention, he can be heard to shout, I cannot breathe and don't kill me. He then is motionless, eyes closed, face first on the road. On Tuesday evening, the mother of Eric Garner, Eric Garner, condemned Floyd's killing. Garner was killed in New York City in July of 2014 by a police officer who placed him in an illegal chokehold. Gwen Carr said, I was horrified to learn about the death of George Floyd and to hear him utter the same dying declaration as my son Eric. I offer my deepest condolences to the Floyd family, and I stand with them in their fight to get justice for George. Unquote. He said it's painful but true that black lives continue to be destroyed by police officers in many communities across our country. They keep killing us, and it's the same story again and again. Joe Biden called the killing horrific. George Floyd's life, but George Floyd mattered. His life mattered. It mattered as much as mine, as much as anyone's in this country. At least it should have, the former vice president said in a video posted to Twitter on Wednesday. Watching his life be taken in the same manner, echoing nearly the same words of Eric Garner more than 5 years ago. The words, I can't breathe, quote unquote, is a tragic reminder that this was not an isolated incident, but part of an ingrained, systemic cycle of injustice that exists in this country. On Wednesday, a fresh video clip emerged showing officers initially wrestling Floyd out of his car. The footage, broadcast by local station KMSP, shows the police trying to handcuff and arrest Floyd. And a new video sent to us shows the moment George Floyd was removed from his vehicle and handcuffed on 38th and Chicago. And Crum said that some additional footage, which hasn't been seen yet by the public or the authorities, has been sent to him by other bystanders and from business surveillance cameras. Crum said that in some ways the use of violent, lethal, and excessive force on Floyd was more disturbing the treatment of Garner, even, because the officer is seen kneeling on Floyd's neck for up to 9 minutes. 9 minutes while he was begging to breathe and begging for his life, Crump said to Today. He said he hoped the killing would be a tipping point for the fairness of the U.S. justice system. Quote, there cannot be two justice systems, one for Black America and one for white America, unquote. Leading athletes, including LeBron James, Lewis Hamilton, and Colin Kaepernick, have expressed their anger and grief over the death of George Floyd. James, who has spoken out against police brutality in the past, compared the police officer's stance during the killing of Floyd with Colin Kaepernick's peaceful protest in 2016, during which he knelt during the national anthem, sparking a wave of similar action and solidarity across different sports to highlight the racial injustices and related incidences of police brutality in the United States. So the next thing we'll cover is a little more of a reaction of one Donald J. Trump. Sharing the screen again. Though busily ranting on Twitter, this one's by Jake Johnson of Common Dreams, and it was written on the 27th. Though busily ranting on Twitter, Trump is completely silent on police killing of George Floyd as Biden demands a federal probe. So this was evidently before Trump's statement that he ordered the FBI to investigate. At the time of the writing of this, but Donald Trump had yet to say a single word about the Monday killing of George Floyd. In 2020, presidential nominee Joe Biden, in contrast, has joined with those demanding a thorough federal investigation into the incident that has sparked large protests and nationwide calls for justice. Excuse me. And the quote from Biden is the same one I just read. As of this writing, Trump had yet to comment on Floyd's death, though more than 24 hours had passed since the video footage emerged on Tuesday, showing the Minneapolis police officer kneeling on the back of Floyd's neck, disregarding the handcuffed man's repeated pleas for his life. While ignoring Floyd's killing, the president on Wednesday did find time to tweet about his Obamagate conspiracy theory and Twitter's decision to fact-check his erroneous attack on vote by mail. And progressive host on his radio show, Benjamin Dixon, also noted Trump's apparent lack of concern for what happened to Floyd. And he said, Black conservatives, see how your guy is more enraged over his Twitter account than Black men being killed by police. Ben Dixon said this at 10:28 a.m. on May 27th. And Biden's demand for a federal investigation into the killing followed similar calls from civil rights groups and members of Congress. John Gordon, executive director of the ACLU of Minnesota, said in a statement Tuesday that the horrific video of Floyd's killing underscores the immediate need for a thorough, fair, and transparent investigation into his death. By the way, there were statements by also Governor Tim Walz by calling for a thorough investigation and for charges. And there were also statements by Keith Ellison, the Attorney General, of Minnesota, who appeared on the Lawrence O'Donnell show to talk about the killing, of Floyd, and who, of course, also condemned it and called for a thorough, fair, and transparent investigation. So John Gordon said the community needs a comprehensive review and the reform of police practices and policies. The officers involved, not just the perpetrator, but also those who stood by and did nothing, must be held accountable. Of course, I entirely agree with that. But if I'm not mistaken, the Minneapolis Police Department has, for some years now, had a reform program in process after an earlier comprehensive review of their practices. There needs to be more than a review of their practices. The structure of power has to be changed. So the power of the police to commit crimes and then to cover them up and then to prevent a trial, or even to rig the outcome of a trial. So that power is removed from the structure of the situation. We need a structural reform in the situation, not just a reform of the practices and policies, but a reform of the power relations that obtain with respect to the police union, the individuals in the police force, the police chief, the DA, and the mayor. There need to be new institutions that need to be placed in the mix so that there cannot be collusion among these various entities any longer. There needs to be structural reform, or things will not change. It's not just a matter of the practices and the policies. There has to be structural reform too. Reform of the power relationships. That is what is critical. The community needs to have much more power when an incident like this happens to make things very difficult for the police involved. They need to have the power to get a verdict which is just. So, also on May 27th, there was another article by Jake Johnson, and I'll share that one too. Has some different intelligence on it. And this one was about the protest on Wednesday nights. Which in the headline is called "A Disgusting Display. Police Fire Rubber Bullets, Stun Grenades, and Tear Gas at Demonstrators Protesting the Killing of George Floyd." And here you see that picture that you saw before. A very good picture of protesters facing the police. And Minneapolis police forces dressed in riot gear fired rubber bullets, tear gas, and stun grenades into crowds of protesters that gathered late on Tuesday to demand justice for the killing of George Floyd. After the video footage showed a cop uh, kneeling on the back of the man's neck as he cried out, "I cannot breathe." Okay, videos and photos posted to social media show people pouring milk into the eyes of demonstrators affected by tear gas as the chemical substance clouds the air, enveloping the thousands of protesters marching in the streets near the site of Floyd's killing. "This is a disgusting display," said Jeremiah Ellison, a city council member who represents the Minneapolis Ward 5. Quote, "I'm here on the south side helping people as I can with milk, water, and towels. So far, I've been unable to prevent the police from firing indiscriminately into the crowd. Just moments ago, I held the towel to a teenage girl's head as blood poured from it," unquote. And Representative Ilhan Omar tweeted that, quote, "Shooting rubber bullets and tear gas at unarmed protesters where there are children present should never be tolerated, ever," unquote. "What is happening tonight in our city is shameful," she added. Quote again, "Police need to exercise restraint and our community needs space to heal." Andy Mannix said, "I got hit with a rubber bullet right after taking video of this mayhem scene. I was across the street from the precinct." And a tweet by Leslie Mack on May 26th. Hashtag George Floyd. And she says police are throwing tear gas and flashbang grenades at protesters in the city of Minneapolis. Okay, much of this was repeated in the other articles. Okay, I went over. And Jacob Fry, in announcing the firing of the four officers who were on the scene, said it is the right decision for our city, the right decision for our community. It is the right one for the Minneapolis Police Department. Quote, "We've stated our values and ultimately we need to live by them." And then there was a tweet from Triple H at Henry Huber on May 27th, who said, "Lots of violent images being shared. This is the protest before cops fired gas. They fired the first shot, but not us. But they don't hear us when we march. So we fight back. Hashtag George Floyd. Hashtag Black Lives Matter. Hashtag Minneapolis." And then the link to the picture. And there's a picture of the intersection near where George Floyd was killed on Monday when an officer knelt on his neck. The protest has the whole block at a standstill. And there are some other quotes. The grieving family by calling for a murder charge. It was a letter from Omar, okay, Representative, and also from Betty McCollum, okay, who's another representative there, and the two states, the senators of the state, Senator Tina Smith and Senator Klobuchar, and they wrote that Mr. Floyd's death appears to be yet another instance of excessive force, leading to the death of African Americans across this country. In addition to the obvious state laws that will govern this case, federal law makes it a crime for a state or local police officer to willfully violate a person's constitutional rights, which includes the use of excessive force. And so obviously, there's a lot of political pushback on this, a lot of attention on it. And the attention is not simply restricted but to Minneapolis and to the state of Minnesota. It is national attention on this. So let me share the screen again. And this is disturbing. This is an article that appeared today. And the headline is Why the Officers Fired for the George Floyd Killing Could Ultimately Get Their Jobs Back. The article was written by Sam Levin in Los Angeles and was published by The Guardian. It says the 4 Minneapolis officers involved in the killing of George Floyd were swiftly fired after the footage of his death went viral. But that doesn't mean they're permanently losing their badges. And then he points out officers in the U.S. are frequently rehired after their termination for misconduct, a problem that experts say increases the likelihood of abuse and killings by police. Despite the decision on Tuesday to fire the policeman who knelt on Floyd's neck for 9 minutes, along with 3 other officers at the scene, it's uncertain if the officers will face any long-term consequences, or repercussions. On the contrary, some civil rights advocates warn the men could ultimately avoid legal and financial consequences, continue working in other police departments, or even win back their positions. And say that's how policing works across America, researchers and activists said, and it's a process that can drag victims' families through years of court proceedings and media attention with minimal relief at the end. And quote, the officers are afforded every opportunity to clear their names and regain everything they lost, their reputation, their status, and their jobs, unquote. Dante Pointer, a California lawyer who represents the victims of the brutality of the police, quote, the family has to endure disappointment after disappointment, unquote. I'm quoting again from Pointer. Floyd's death on Monday, now under FBI investigation, was the latest example of a Black American dying at the hands of a white police officer. And then there's the identification of Chauvin, and the other terminated officers were Thomas Lane, Tu Tao, and J. Alexander Kung. And then the article proceeds with more background on what happened. And it points out prompt termination is also uncommon and often doesn't last. Officers can appeal firings, typically supported by powerful police unions. The outcome is frequently decided by arbiters in secretive hearings. A recent analysis by a local Minnesota paper, the Pioneer Press, found arbiters reversed 46% of police terminations in the last 5 years. Police chiefs across the U.S. have publicly complained the process forces them to put officers back on the street after firing them for egregious conduct, such as unjustified killings, sexual abuse, and for lying. Then officers are rehired, quote, "It says they have a license to kill," unquote, said Kat Brooks, an activist in Oakland, where transit police killed Oscar Grant in 2009. Quote, "If they killed this time, they've often killed before or have a history of problematic use of force. In one Bay Area city with high rates of violence by the police, there are numerous officers who have been involved in more than one fatal shooting of a civilian. If the fired officers in Minneapolis don't win their jobs back," quote, "I think they'll quietly be invited to work in other law enforcement departments," unquote, said Brooks. Some police departments also knowingly hire officers who were fired in other jurisdictions, said Roger Goldman, an emeritus law professor at St. Louis University, an expert on licensing of police. That's often because the departments are located in smaller cities with tight budgets and can pay a lower salary to an officer who is terminated. They are so strapped for cash, so they hire you, Goldman said. A Cleveland officer who was fired after fatally shooting 12-year-old Tamir Rice in 2014 was hired by a small Ohio village department 4 years later. His new employer defended the decision, noting the officer was never charged. The Louisiana officer fired Alton Sterling in 2016 as he was selling CDs outside a convenience store, was eventually fired in 2018. But last year, the city reached a settlement with the officer that retracted the firing and allowed him to resign. It's really devastating. You took someone's life. Quiniana McMillan, the mother of Sterling's son, said in an interview this week, "The long process of trying to get justice," unquote, "impacted us really badly, emotionally, physically, mentally. It was draining," unquote, she said, adding that it was painful to think of the obstacles Floyd's family will face moving forward, even with determinations. It puts a tremendous burden on the families who seek justice. It's human to seek justice. And when they fail to get justice, it's so terribly heartbreaking. It damages the belief system, okay, of people. Okay, it damages what remains of their faith in society and faith in the law. It's terribly, terribly destructive to the social order. Sometimes police chiefs unknowingly hire officers with misconduct histories. No. Because of laws that allow officers to keep their disciplinary records secret. Other times they aren't running through background checks, or they determine an officer's record would not be a liability, said Ben Grunwald, a Duke University law professor. In a study Grunwald co-authored last month for the Yale Law Journal, he and another research found an average of 1,100 officers working in Florida each year have previously been fired. They tended to move to agencies with fewer resources and slightly larger communities of color. The fired officers were also twice as likely to be fired a second time compared to officers who have never been fired. The consequences of this rehiring are severe, said a civil rights attorney based in Atlanta. If you don't fear losing your job and you know you have all these different immunities that will protect you, you know you will get away with misconduct, unquote. He said it was hard not to think of this dynamic when watching the video of the Minneapolis killing, where the officer ignored Floyd's cries for help. An attorney for Chauvin did not respond to a request for comment, and the other officers could not be reached. Some advocates have pushed for a publicly accessible national database that documents officers' disciplinary history, which could help to prevent rehirings and endanger the public. Quote, you can look up what a doctor has done, what a realtor has done, what you and I have done as members of the public, but you have no way to look into the background of a person with a badge and a gun, unquote, said Pointer. And Mark McCoy, whose brother Willie McCoy was killed by police in Vallejo, California last year, said it was hard when the family learned the officers involved had previously killed other civilians and been the subject of excessive force complaints. Quote, these laws that you think will lead to the officer's arrest are actually there to protect them. And so these articles tell the sad story that we have been going through, and the story that requires that a lot more be done. Sorry, I'm trying to reach. Okay. There was also an article of some interest. I'll share this one too. This was the article. It appeared in The Guardian again. Two of the officers involved were previously reviewed for the use of force. Okay, this is according to a database that documents instances of police brutality. Video footage showed Derek Chauvin, his kneeling on Floyd's neck for 9 minutes. I'll skip this because it was repeated in some of the other things. Okay, and get to the point of this. Chauvin, who joined the force in 2001, had already been involved in several incidents, according to a database by Minneapolis communities united against police brutality. Chauvin was one of 5 officers who were placed on leave after they shot and wounded an indigenous man in 2011. The Daily Beast reported. Later that year, officers had been responding to a domestic violence call. Chauvin claimed that the man reached for his gun. The man was shot, not by Chauvin, but by a different officer, and wounded. The authorities later determined that the officers had acted appropriately. Second Officer Tu Tao was a 10-year veteran of the force. He was previously sued by a man who alleged he and two officers used excessive force during a 2014 arrest. The man who had been walking along with his pregnant girlfriend was stopped by Tao and another officer. The lawsuit alleged they punched, kicked, and kneed the man's face and body, causing broken teeth as well as other bruising and trauma, unquote. The lawsuit was settled out of court. It was settled out of court. Then there was proof that the police were at fault. Obviously, that's why they settled out of court. That's the only way these things get settled out of court. Quote, seeing that a horrific video begs the question, what did the police do internally in response to the 2017 incident? I suppose that probably means the 2014 incident here. An attorney in the suit, Seth Leventhal, told the Daily Beast, adding that, quote, what happened in 2017 was a pretty serious incident that made no headlines at all, unquote. Combined, the two men, have been the subject of more than a dozen civilian complaints, for which Chauvin has faced 3 verbal reprimands. The database confirmed that internal reviews of Chauvin and Tao's use of force by the Minneapolis Police Department resulted in no disciplinary action each time. The Minnesota Senator, Amy Klobuchar, has faced backlash for what critics have called a tame demand for a complete and thorough outside investigation, and is now being questioned on her record. Between 1999 and 2007, Klobuchar, the state's then top prosecutor, declined to press charges against more than a dozen officers accused of killing civilians. In 2006, Chauvin was one of several officers involved in the shooting death of a man who stabbed others before turning on the police. Although Klobuchar was the Hennepin County attorney at the time of an October 2006 police shooting involving Chauvin, she did not prosecute, and instead the case went to a grand jury that declined to charge the officers with wrongdoing in 2008. As protests continued in the Twin Cities on Wednesday, Chauvin's past altercations have drawn additional scrutiny of the Minneapolis Police Department's handling of Floyd's death and race relations with law enforcement in the state. Quote, this is what finally broke the camel, and now it's about to go down, one protester said during Tuesday night's demonstrations. That could have been me, it could have been my son. It's unjust. It just shouldn't be, unquote. Campaign Zero, a social justice organization that maps police violence across the U.S., found that Minneapolis police kill black residents at a rate more than 13 times higher than that of white people, one of the nation's largest racial disparities. What are they disparities in? Police killings of people. Quote, our community continues to be traumatized again and again and again. We must demand answers, the city councilwoman Andrea Jenkins said in a statement to Cara, I guess that's pronounced. One police-involved shooting in Minnesota that did result in a conviction only added to the claims of racial bias in state laws. In 2017, Mohammed Noor, a Somali-American police officer, shot and killed an unarmed white woman after responding to her 9/11 call. Noor was convicted of third-degree murder in April 2019, the first police officer in the state to be convicted in decades. Chauvin has retained Tom Kelly as his lawyer. The lawyer is a prominent defense attorney who represented Yanez. Kelly did not return any requests for comment. 2016, the Minneapolis Police Department revised its policies to require officers to intervene or report whenever they witness another officer engaging in excessive force. The three other officers involved in responding to the forgery call were fired under this revision. The article was amended on the 28th of May 2020 to clarify Klobuchar did not prosecute, and the case went to a grand jury that declined to charge the officers with wrongdoing in 2008. Okay, so that's that. I could go on with a couple more articles. Protests are still going on there. And of course, there were the LA protests as well. And protests have spread to Chicago, okay, as well. I don't have an article on that, okay, to go over. But there is national anger about this. There is national anger about this. And we don't know how this is going to develop in the coming days. I am not necessarily myself hoping that things are going to die down. I think these killings, these racial killings, are something that has to stop. And I think the motivation to stop them is directly related to the severity of the protests and the severity of the riots. In other words, the severity of the cost that the communities and that our country has to pay for the injustices which it allows. If things quiet down too fast, then this killing will be forgotten, okay, in weeks. As the trial goes forward, of course, there will be reminders. The anger will come flooding back, okay, a little, and this will happen a few times. But eventually, this killing, like the Philando Castile killing and many of the others, will fade from our memory. But it should not. It should not fade from our memory, because if it does, nothing will be done about it. And nothing will be done about it. This has to be put front and center on the national agenda. And there have to be changes at every level of government, from the federal government on down through the state governments and to the local governments. And as I say, to the police unions and to the institutions and to the power structures. Only a thoroughgoing radical change in the structures we have now will stop these periodic racially motivated killings. Okay, that's what I have to say here tonight. I'm now going to go over your statements. I know you have a lot of things to say about this. Stacy points out again, there needs to be publicly searchable nationwide a database that lists cops where they worked, things they have done, complaints, firings, prosecutions, and all the legal players involved as well. Also, VICAP needs to be mandatory. Nothing is mandatory unless the penalties for violating what is mandatory are severe. People have to be deterred to recognize that something, is mandatory, and the probability of their getting caught has to be substantial. If the punishment is low and the probability of getting caught, is also very low, then the practices will not stop. And the laws have to be strong and the probability of conviction has to be high when someone violates the laws. Stacy points out VICAP is the National Database of Violent Crimes. It lists crimes, details some evidence, etc. Thank you, Stacy. That is something that should be used to catalog police crimes. Okay, Glenna Mayer asked if cops too. Stacy says VICAP is presently optional. It should be made mandatory, as you say. Gina Marie says protests are breaking out all over the nation. That is good. That is good. It is merited. It is good for us to see these protests. It is good enough. It is good for us to see this issue brought to the forefront. Yes, Black Lives Matter. They matter because they are the lives put at risk by the police. And the changes to the way we police and to the way we govern from top to bottom is the only way to save and to make sure that Black lives do matter in the United States of America. Barbara says protests are awesome. I read the tweet, by Rick that the riots were actually started by a policeman. Barbara says, fuck the police, people first. Rick says, I watched the video, looked like a pizza delivery, kept following him and filming him. Mustafa Hajimar said, hi all. Charles Brooks said, hi. Kay said, protests are breaking out in Columbus here in Ohio tonight. And Charles said, Dr. King said, the rioting is the language of the unheard. Yes, I remember that. I remember Dr. King said that. And Glenna says, people act like this is an isolated incident. We know it happens daily. Why don't people see that? Because they want to forget it. Because for the most part, it's not happening to them. It's happening to Black people. It's not happening to them. And Mustafa Hajimar says, the justice system is broken, as Bernie says. Yes, the police departments started out as the slave patrols. They did. They did. Don McCaslin says, midst. Yes, midst. And Materato says, yes, the Glenna Mayer. How much violence and hatred and economic and social injustice can this country tolerate? Evidently a massive amount. Steve Wolfbrand says, good evening. Don McCaslin says, our history is saturated in blood and genocide. Look back at slavery. Look at the extermination of Native Americans from day one. Yes, and still going on. Kay says, huge turnout in Columbus now. Police are there too. And Mustafa Hajimah said, Bernie is the only one who can fix this country from the bottom up. It will take more than Bernie. Take more than Bernie. It will take all of us, as well. But yes, right now, The man for this hour is still Bernie Sanders. The person for this hour is still Bernie Sanders. There's no one else who has the name and reputation in order to command the respect of the people who have to go through the kinds of changes that we have to go through in this country. Steve says intentional murder and torture, fuck those pigs. McCaslin says this psyop takes our attention off the crimes of Wall Street and the Corona crew who have crashed our economy. We can pay attention to 2 or 3 things at a time. In fact, my very next live stream on Saturday is going to be very much about what's going on in our economy. And Steve Wolfbrandt, in fact, in part, it will be going over the new unemployment results that we got on Thursday. Steve said, I just watched the entire video again. It's painful to watch. Yes, it is. Cases, I saw that Klobuchar let the same cop off for a diff killing in the same area when she was in office there. Biden's buddy for VP. This event and by Klobuchar's previous involvement with some of the same cops may have created a difficult situation for her in relation to her eligibility to be the VP candidate. Now, the word is that Biden was favoring Harris anyway, but Harris is going to run into massive opposition from the progressives. And Harris's previous connection to Mnuchin and her failure to prosecute Mnuchin so that he would be here to sabotage the recovery from the pandemic, that's a very strong argument against her too. These 2 things, their actions as prosecutors, pretty much create a situation where the leading candidate for the vice presidency right now, since Biden seems to be insisting on a woman, seems to be Elizabeth Warren. Some of us would probably say, oh, well, she's probably better than Klobuchar and Harris anyway. But others are pretty angry at Elizabeth Warren for her role in this past the campaign and her betrayal of our causes and our values whenever the going gets tough. And Glenna Mayer says, the Green Party, is pretty awesome. I'd like to see who the Green Party is going to nominate this time. I don't think either Daria Hunter or Howie Hawkins will do. Stephanie says, share it to all groups. Sorry, I have a migraine, or I would be commenting more. Thank you, Stephanie, for all your great work sharing. Tay says, I have no confidence in the federal investigation whatsoever. That was a real clown show this evening. I didn't see the clown show, sorry. And Glenna says, ouch, sorry. Steve Wolfbrand says, a lot of helicopters over downtown LA. I can see out my window, don't know what's going on. Yeah, they've been monitoring protests, in LA. But Pasta and Fiorella were going there tonight. So we'll probably have some in-person reports from them. Gina Marie says, protesting in L.A. Gina says, Rachel Mao said there was protests in L.A. and several other states for George Floyd. Stacy says, but Klobuchar is a cracker and effectively a Republican, I know. Charles says, you're watching Rachel Maddow, just kidding. Steve says, I have a nice view of the skyline. I don't see any smoke yet. Well, hopefully there won't be any smoke, in L.A. Gina Marie says, in the background, the Minneapolis mayor was just on. Okay, Glenna says, give the police time to start then. Doc, and Steve says, Doc, why aren't those pigs arrested yet, for crying out loud? The mayor has asked for them to be charged. It's in the hands of the DA now. Stacy says, agents provocateur. Yes, they are. Steve says, IKR. IKR, what's IKR? Please clue me in. I guess I know about IKR. I knew about IKR, but I forgot. Clue me in on IKR again. Steve says the Convo Couch live streamed the LA protest yesterday. Yes, I know they did, but I think they were going out there again today. I saw live streams from them earlier in the day, and they said they had to leave to go downtown. So I think they were going to protest. And Steve says 9 minutes of torture and death. And Gina Marie says a new video showing a new angle Ellison is talking about on Rachel Maddow now. Stephanie says, sorry guys, I really have to go. My head's really killing me. I love you all. I did share to all my groups. Thank you, Steph. Lana Dell says, I think the governor called for the FBI investigation. And Stephanie said, good night, loves. It looked like more cops were actually kneeling on George Floyd. Oh, my God. How many cops can kneel on the guy's neck? God, I can't believe it. Dolores says, good night, Stephanie. Steve says, good night, feel better soon. Stacy says that useless Valerie Jarrett was on defending Obama and spreading BS and platitudes. Obama and Holder did absolutely zilch for Freddie Gray or Ferguson. I remember they did absolutely zilch. They did absolutely zilch for the whole police mess all the time they were in office. Steve says there were 3 cops on him. Kay says Ali Velshi is reporting live from Minneapolis now on Rachel Maddow. Stacy says protesters have reached the 3rd precinct of the Minneapolis PD. Ali Velshi is on the scene. Steve says Biden doesn't write his own tweets. He can barely read them. Steve says good. Stacy says there were some suspicious-looking black bloc dressed characters breaking down a barrier. Steve says, I hope they burn it down. Well, they may be cops trying to start trouble. You know, agents provocateur. And Rick says, I've got a meeting coming up. Take care all and be safe. Steve says, we need a special prosecutor. Yeah, Donald Trump. If Donald Trump were to appoint a special prosecutor, that prosecutor would absolutely whitewash the cops. Maybe Congress can appoint a special prosecutor. I don't think so, though. Stacy says, oh my God, new video shows 3 cops kneeling on Floyd while another looks on. And Gina says, hearing Floyd cry is the most heartbreaking video. Steve says, yes, the other 2 are behind the car. Stacy says, well, you can see them now, motherfuckers. He cried out for his mom, who's been dead for a while. Heartbreaking. Gina, it makes me sick. Calling for his mother, I can't. Cops doing tear gas again now. My blood is boiling. I'm thinking about protesting this week, in Minneapolis. Lana says, I don't think all the cops are bad, but too many of them are on a power kick. All police should be subject to ongoing training and psychologist tests. Most of us have ongoing education is required to keep our jobs. They should too. But just my opinion. Yeah, I have that opinion too, but I want to point out that even though all cops are not bad, it's quite true that most cops are complicit in this. They have to be complicit, because if they were not complicit, there would not be so many instances of cops abusing their power and other cops simply looking on. How about just the other day in El Monte, California? Oh, there was a cop who was beating up a fairly elderly woman in a wheelchair, and the other cops were just watching. The other cops were just standing there, surrounding them, stopping other people from intervening, and they were just watching. Nobody moved to stop the cop from beating the woman. It was just incredible. Who brought up these people? What kinds of families did they have? Steve says, this one is not going away easily. Unless those 4 pigs are convicted of murder, there will be widespread unrest. I think LA has something happening Saturday. I will go. Steve, it seems to me if 3 of them were kneeling on his neck, then perhaps those 3 might be convicted, of murder. But probably the 4th, who was only looking on, might be convicted either of negligent homicide or of being an accessory before the fact, or something like that. But unless that person is directly implicated in the murder, I doubt he could be convicted of it. Lana says, George was killed about 13 or 14 blocks from my office. Gina says, MSNBC is live in Minneapolis, says breaking news right now. Stacy says, Popo is on their roofy roof. What's that? Lana says, I think they're going to try and weasel out of this by saying he had some underlying medical issue and actually died at the hospital. Oh, sure. I fully expect that. If so, I called BS ahead of time as he lost his water while still on the ground. Trying to say that without being disrespectful. Ali Velshi is one of the few good reporters MSNBC has left. I agree. I think Ali Velshi is pretty good. He's pretty good on the economics of things, too. But as Stacy says, Ali's okay. He's MMT deficient, though. Yes, Stacy. He is. He is deficient, but he's still pretty good. And he's not absolutely biased towards the 1%. Not absolutely biased. And he's also for Medicare for all. And Steve says he was dead before they put him in that ambulance. That fucker strangled him and kept strangling after he was dead for another few minutes. I just rewatched the video. Anna says, I read 2 of the 4 officers, are rookies. They protect each other. It's disgusting. Lana says, so another case of Fed funding. Another case for Fed funding. The police. Stacy says, friendly fire is a great incentive to keep your mouth shut. And Mustafa says, protests all over the country as we speak. Steve says, Klobuchar is canceled. Steve says, I'm going to love seeing these 4 go to prison. They'll be needing a lot, of Vaseline. Kay says he probably knows MMT, but isn't allowed to teach it on that network. He's from Canada. Well, if he's from Canada, it doesn't necessarily mean he knows MMT. There aren't a lot of Canadians who know MMT. What I meant, though, was he goes to where things are going on and reports truthfully on it. Yes, he seems to. Kay says, I'm trying to watch both here and live coverage, so I am in and out. Might have to watch this report on YouTube later. Steve says, what are you seeing? Stacy says, big fires. Sandy says, people are in the streets and buildings are on fire. Kay says, another bunch of fires and mess again. Stacy says, a big fire has reached the adjacent building. Kay, at least Ali Velshi promotes Hashtag Medicare for all as a Canadian. He does. He does. Kay says, yes, he sure does, Lana. Steve says, Klobuchar didn't prosecute him. She sure didn't, Steve. And I'll bet she's regretting that decision tonight. Lana says, Steve, I can't wait until someone, hopefully, who's more progressive, primaries Klobuchar. The only reason I will cheer if she is chosen as the VP. Oh, you mean because hopefully she won't be in Minnesota anymore, but it might be worse. She'll be in Washington, maybe. This reminds me of what happened when Rodney King was beaten by police. Steve says, and the Watts riots, right? It reminds me of both. Sandy says, absolutely, Steve. Steve says that should ruin her career, in my opinion. Steve says, the guy who was breaking AutoZone windows is a St. Paul police officer by the name of Jacob Pedersen. A conversation between his ex-fiancee and a friend shows he used her mask and gloves. He is an undercover agent provocateur who is starting fires and damaging property. Hashtag George Floyd. Wouldn't surprise me. They do that shit. They do. They really do. Lana says, yeah, he is black, a black officer. Lana says, is this actually made international? Of course it is. The Guardian has been covering it in detail, great detail. Steve says, I'm sure it has. Stacy said, he's white, dressed in black, and a black respirator. Video here. Sandy Degg says it's a national disgrace. Sandy says this has to stop. Stacy says, Facebook photo. They just reported that the original videos were recorded by a 17-year-old girl. PTSD for the rest of her life. Steve says sometimes fire is cleansing. You just have to burn the whole thing down and start over. Kaepernick tried to tell them. And Matt says, you're absolutely right. I hope the protests do not end. Every time this happens, we just keep turning the page. It's absurd. Steve says she did a follow-up video. She is devastated. And Lana says, the Karens, both M and F, keep carping about the fires and looting. Not my style, but a well-timed article posted by Johnny Axon reminds that Samuel Adams and the Sons of Liberty were the same. And Stacy says, fuck their stuff, they're insured. Stacy, an insurance agent, said they're not covered for the riots. Lana says, Klobuchar and Kamala, the cop sisters, yeah, the K cops. KK. All I need is another K. Stacy says there's riders for riots. And Lana says, Stacy, I hope they paid for those extra riders. And Robin McDaniel says, I thought that the wrestling guy was running green. Can't remember his name. Jesse Ventura, the former governor of Minnesota. But I saw on Twitter he wasn't going to pursue. But they're still after him. Kay says one green candidate is Howie Hawkins 2020. Yeah, the other one is Dario Hunter. Oh, IKR. I know, right? Yeah. I thought I knew that. Stacy says the video of the glass breaking at the AutoZone is interesting. Tempered glass is hard to break. Apparently he's using a tool to do this with a hammer. Stacy said they had Republican parents. Oh, God. Lana says, I didn't see the incident with the lady in the wheelchair. Yeah, that was reported on the Convo Couch. It was covered by Johnny Tsunami. As they often say, Johnny 2 on the ones and twos. He's usually on the ones and twos, but now he's beginning to report. And this was some live coverage by Johnny Tsu. And Kay says, I have heard there was some right-wing militia members there last night with guns. The new word for civil war is boogaloo. Steve says he's also been involved in a murder by cops. Oh, God. Stacy says, I like Minnesota. Fits right now. Minnesota, Jesus. Now, Minnesota's not like that. I'm prepared to believe the cops might be. But I visited Minnesota once or twice. And the people I visited with were all on the right side of civil rights and civil liberties questions. And they didn't seem to have a prejudice bone in their bodies. Steve Wilbrand says, Johnny Tsunami has been doing some nice stuff lately. Yes, he has. He's a young guy learning fast. Kay says, I call Ohio the Alabama, the North Coast, too. Laugh out loud. I thought the Alabama of the North Coast was in central Pennsylvania, Kay. Any other comments? Lana says, we have the Mississippi River and Minnehaha Avenue, too. Okay, I'm going to take this opportunity to remind you of my YouTube channel. There it is, going up on the bottom of your screen. Please remember my Patreon link at patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. I'll run it one more time. And then I'll hide it so you can see my chin again. And I'll check out your latest comments. I thought that Minneapolis was a big city. They're like a little over 400K. Montgomery County has 1.5K. Well, Minneapolis itself is not such a big city, but when you combine it with St. Paul and you combine it with the suburbs, I think it gets to be pretty big. I don't know if it crosses two counties or not. Hennepin County is the county that Minneapolis is in, I believe, if I remember correctly. I once did a county level study, of Minnesota, a county level statistical analysis of all the counties, in Minnesota. It was a statistical study designed to produce funding formulas for the counties for the Farmers Home Administration. Very, very heavy statistically. Steve says Tsunami is a nickname. Yes, I thought that was a nickname too. His name is probably Johnny Tsu, right? It's probably TSU, right? And Kay says, been a good discussion. See you all soon. Thank you all. Lana says, good night all. Good night, Kay. Lots of suburbs in Minneapolis plus St. Paul. And Lana says, yes, Hennepin and Ramsey County. Yeah, I thought it was something like that. I want to remind you that I'll be back on Saturday, that I'm off tomorrow. And then on Saturday, what I'll be doing is, I'll be doing a few things. I'll be going over the Iranian fueling of Venezuela that's been going on, and also the Trump order but basically designating Twitter and Facebook as not neutral platforms, but publishers in retaliation for Twitter placing a warning on Trump's tweets. He retaliated by saying they were publishers. So I'll be talking about that. That is very important. And I'll be talking about unemployment as well, covering the new figures, and also a very short piece from by Pavlina Chernyeva, and also talking about how the Fed has bailed out the investor class and corporate America. And you'd be surprised at how they've been bailed out. They were bailed out without using any actual money at all yet. It was simply the threat of money and the operations of the stock market that actually bailed them out. So Saturday is going to be a really interesting show. I'll ask you all to come back. I'll see you then. Thanks for hanging in so long. I'm ending the broadcast. Steve says, Jonathan Mayorga, I believe, we're Facebook friends. Oh, Jonathan Mayorga, huh? Interesting name. Okay, Steve. Have a good night, everyone. Steve says, Johnny Tsu is Fee's brother. Okay. Good night, all. So he's really fam.